Now, it's been a while since I've made a Dan in his van video, but I felt compelled to talk about quite an important subject. Well, I think it's important anyway. I did a music workshop in a school. I don't work in the school, but I was invited in to do an improvisation workshop. And in the corridor in the music department, I heard two of the permanent music teachers there talking about real instruments, natural instruments, and proper instruments, and what constitutes what. And it was quite an interesting discussion. I decided I wouldn't get involved. I didn't want to stick my oar in because I was obviously a visitor to the school. I didn't want to get embroiled in a discussion. But I thought I'd deal with these three things. Natural instrument first. There's no such thing bar one, and that's the human voice. And even then, you have to learn how to use it, all the larynx and your diaphragm and everything to actually learn to sing. So, although it is a natural instrument, it still takes the same amount of tuition as an other instrument would take. So that's a natural instrument. So I think they were sort of implying that the violin was a natural instrument. I'm a violinist, so, you know, I have a vested interest in this as a subject. But it's not. It's centuries of development. It's technology. And the woods used in a violin are carefully selected. The carving is precision. You know, the best violin makers are those who know how to shape pieces of wood and know how to create the sort of the top and the bass on a violin. So it's far from a natural instrument. It may be made of natural materials, but that's a different thing. The flute, it's metal. I know it's a woodwind instrument, but it's metal. And the keys and the linkages and the pads and everything, they are manufactured to such unbelievable tolerances that if it's just half a millimetre out, it's not going to work. So, you know, the whole natural instrument thing it's kind of a red herring, really. Then we have proper instruments and real instruments. Now, I think they were kind of really putting these two things together. Real and proper. Well, what's a real musical instrument? I mean, you can get philosophical in the pub, you know, what's reality? You know, is anything real? And after 6 pints, you know, it just gets deeper and more silly. But a real instrument, well, everything is. Every musical instrument is a real piece of kit that you can use and that you can express. You know, you can talk via the instrument or sing via the instrument. That's what it's about. It's about expression and the processes of music, which you can play on any instrument at all. You know, I've got a theremin. Really? You don't even touch the thing and you move towards it. It's completely electronic. But there are composers, Martin, who wrote for the theremin. It's a musical instrument and fiendishly difficult to play, hugely difficult. You've either got to have perfect pitch or very good relative pitch and just listening around you to work out your, knowledge of intervals and distances, in the pitch field and all of that sort of thing. So these two teachers, I decided I wouldn't get embroiled in it at all because I might have got a bit cross. But they were implying that electric guitars weren't real instruments or weren't proper instruments. You think, oh, come on, it's, the Fender Telecaster came out in 1950, right? That means that if a teenager bought one in 1950, if they had the money to buy one, they would be 90 now. So it's been 3 generations since we've had an electric guitar, and they're still viewed by music departments as some sort of menace. The irony being that actually with an electric guitar, it can be the quietest instrument on earth if you don't plug it in. And being a guitarist myself and a guitar teacher, I always tell my pupils, you play with and without an amp. Play lots without an amp, because if you can hear the tone if you can hear mostly note coming from your guitar, the chances are that your tone is going to be really good. And it also means you can practice anyway. You can practice in private. You can just play with no amplifier at all. And of course they're thinking, well, yes, but it's loud, it's rock. It's this sort of that you can't play on any other sort of music on a guitar, on an electric guitar. Well, of course you can play anything, but you can have all of your proper sounds, because half of a guitar is the piece of wood. So we're back to a guitar being, and a Fender Telecaster being made of natural materials, just like the violin. Well, of course it is. But if you look on the front of a Fender amp, it'll say Fender Musical Instruments on an amplifier. You think, is it a musical instrument? Well, of course it is. You can't play music through a guitar amp. It'll just sound rubbish because it's not tuned. It's not designed for the playback of music. It's designed for an electric guitar. They are part and parcel. The two things together are the instrument. So yes, it's a musical instrument. Drums, of course they're musical instruments. They're some of the oldest, actually. The oldest creations, things that you can hit with an animal, so a stick on a piece of animal skin. A xylophone, it's very carefully selected wood, and it's something that will withstand pitch variation and all sorts of other things. So real instruments and proper instruments. The thing is, everything is a proper instrument. You can express, you can speak through a snare drum. I'm a music examiner, and I heard a snare drum exam the other day. And people thinking, well, how do you examine that? Isn't it just rhythms? Well, no, it's not. It's whether or not you use the snare, the actual snare part, the sort of gauze at the bottom, and where you play on the skin, the dynamics. And of course, things like the rhythmic character. How do you phrase a snare drum? Like a pattern? The answer is you could taper it slightly at the end, both in tempo and in volume. There's masses you can do with a snare drum, huge amounts. And actually it goes for any instrument. So, in short, natural musical instrument doesn't exist. Proper musical instrument, that's everything that exists now. Everything that you can play on, even a tiny little starter ukulele. People berate the ukulele for being a sort of pretend sort of kiddies instrument. Yet if you've got one in your studio and you put some chords over the top of some acoustic guitar chords, suddenly there's that extra dimension there. It's a useful thing to have. Completely useful thing to have. Recorder. Everyone goes, oh yeah, I played the recorder when I was at primary school. You can play the recorder to a very, very high level and make it sound amazing. Why can't you? It's a real instrument. It's a proper thing. Things like violin bows, they're made of Pernambuco wood, but that wood is endangered. What do you do when Pernambuco wood runs out? Do you suddenly have an instrument that isn't a proper instrument? Clarinets, the wood that's used to make that, and I can't remember the name of it, but it's from a couple of patches in Africa. Again, highly endangered. The answer is you use composite materials. You use something that is a really decent substitute. And a clarinetist who's worth their salt, in 50 years' time, when they think, well, there aren't any I'm just going to learn on this. And they're still playing the same music, the same repertory, they're improvising, they're creating. And the thing is, you create on any instrument, regardless of what it's made of, even if it's a substitute material. Indeed, the substitute materials and the composites may actually be better than the original materials. They have fewer acoustic vices or fewer problems, or they're more stable at varying humidities or temperatures. So we exist with music, with musical instruments, to create and to express ourselves. That's what it's for. There's no such thing as a natural musical instrument. They're all proper, they're all real, and they all have equal merit.